Britain could restrict immigrants from Greece as well as other Eurozone citizens. Prime Minister David Cameron says it's an option on the table in case of what he calls extraordinary stresses and strains caused by Europe's sovereign debt crisis. But Cameron hopes that doesn't happen and will do whatever it takes, he says, to keep Britain and its economy safe. EU rules allow the free flow of people to live and work around the group's member states. Concerns mounting in Britain, though, about a wave of migrants from struggling states like Spain, like Greece, if their economies continue spiralling down. Live back to London. Shall we go now? Talk about this with George Eaton. He's from the New Statesman magazine, where he edits the Staggers blog. George, thank you for being with us. David Cameron says the possible restriction of Greeks to Britain is a legal position, but is it legal by EU standards?
No, as things stand, it's not. There's never been a situation in which one EU member state has been allowed to limit immigration from a long-standing EU member state. It's true to say that transitional controls can be and have been imposed on new EU members, such as the East European accession countries. But as things stand, the free movement of people is one of the fundamental principles of the EU treaty, and I think it's very hard to see Britain being able to derogate from that.
But I wonder, George, if times they are changing. I mean, Cameron is known to want to be tougher on immigration. Also, of course, German Chancellor Angela Merkel said immigrants must do more to integrate in European societies. Do you think the boundaries are going back up across Europe slowly?
I think it's true to say that countries are taking a more sceptical view of immigration, and certainly in times of recession, far-right parties, right-wing parties tend to win more support, and so that puts pressure on sort of moderate centrist leaders to act. But I think there's a big difference between national countries choosing to limit immigration and the EU as a whole choosing to abandon the principle of the free movement of people. Cameron suggested he could do it in the case of Greece. The problem is that under Article 18 of the EU treaty, that you're banned basically from discriminating according to nationality, and so if you wanted to impose controls on Greece, you'd have to impose controls on immigration for every country. And is Cameron going to accept a situation in which UK citizens are unable to work and live in the rest of the EU? I don't think he is.
Good point. I mean, over 17 million people were out of work in the Eurozone in May. That's 11% of the working population. I guess the practical excuse being used here is that tightening up migrant policy may help that.
Well, I think that's falling for what's called the lump of labour fallacy, the belief that there are a finite number of jobs in the economy, and they have to be distributed accordingly. The evidence actually suggests that migrants increase the demand for labour as well as the supply of labour. So when British employers choose to take on Polish workers, they're not. It's not the case that if you'd restricted immigration, those jobs would have gone to British workers. They wouldn't have existed at all. So actually, immigration, I think, in general, is a win-win, both for the migrant and for the host country.
There's a school of thought, isn't there, that Britain's dragged its heels all the way along on the whole European project. I mean, David Cameron also floated the prospect of a referendum on quitting the EU, which got his fellow MPs very excited. And, of course, Britain also backed out of Europe's new tighter fiscal rules just a few months back. Now, how you look at it, it kind of appears that it's dragging its heels. Should Britain reduce its Euro ties? What would the ramifications of that be?
Well, I think the ramifications would be significant, because it has been the policy of both Labour and Conservative governments for decades to remain close to Europe and to pursue integration, even if they haven't always said so. Margaret Thatcher is seen as a very Eurosceptic prime minister, but she signed the Single European Act, which was did more to increase European integration than any other European treaty. In Cameron's case, though, we are seeing a situation where Britain is moving increasingly closer to the EU exit. So Cameron's position is that he wants to secure opt-outs from the new fiscal union. He wants to perhaps repatriate powers in the area of social policy. But really, the rest of the EU, there's very little prospect of them agreeing to that. The priority is addressing the euro crisis, and for them, this tedious row of Britain over sovereignty is a distraction. And actually that then puts Cameron in a very difficult position, because his MPs will say the renegotiation has failed. It's not in Britain's interests to, Britain is losing more than it gains from the EU. And so withdrawal is the only viable option. And then I think it would be very difficult for Cameron to reject that argument, because his whole position is based on the premise that that powers should be repatriated. And then if it turns out they can't be, then I think that there'll be very little positive case for Britain to stay in the EU.
George, we appreciate your thoughts. Political commentator George Eaton there for the New Statesman in London. Thank you.